You're watching the CFF Sites Week 3 College Fantasy Football Show. My name is Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the CFF site. And that's right, Week 3 is here already. Seems like a blink of an eye. 2 weeks in the books, and week number 3 right here. So after this week, we're going to be about a quarter of the way through the college fantasy football regular season. And last week's show, I spoke a lot about players that maybe we should hold, players that we missed on, and maybe players that we still needed a little bit more time. I've got about 24 notes here of names, teams that we're going to run down on this week's show. But of course, as always, I've got to kick it off with the Helmet Blitz. We've got 4 new additions up there on the shelf. The NC State Wolfpack makes an appearance on the shelf. The Missouri Tigers and Bo Pribula makes an appearance on the shelf. How about the Arizona Wildcats on the shelf as well? And thanks to Lance Stedman, he said, Joe, I've got to get my Iowa Hawkeyes up there. Contributed. We got the Iowa helmet. Unfortunately, it was not a good week for you, Lance, with the Hawkeyes falling to the Cyclones, but we've got the Hawkeyes up there right on the shelf behind me. So let me give a shout out to all the contributors in the last week for the Helmet Blitz. And of course, Lance Stedman with Iowa. We've got Joseph Diffie, Peter Crispino, Charles Seward, Kevin Hugus, Jesse Lauterbach, Daryl Grant, James Sakala, Mike McDonald, and Stephen Bader. Thank you guys for contributing to the Helmet Blitz, to the donations that you guys are helping get filling up those shelves. And there's just some more names that have come in, haven't had a chance. I'll get to them on the next show. But if you want to see your team up there, you want to talk some trash to your rivals, get in on the Helmet Blitz link on the homepage of the CFF site and get your team up there. Let's get them all. All power conference teams is the goal before the end of the year. And we're, I think, more than halfway there. So let's get into the week 3 show. And let me just start off. I'm going to go in order of the games that were played last weekend. And I just want to start with James Madison. I mentioned this in my notes and observations. If they're going to start Alonzo Barnett and Matthew Sluka, if they're going to play both of those guys, I don't think either one is an option. It really is going to come down to, in my opinion, if one of those guys gets hurt or they go to all in on one guy. It's really unfortunate because that's a position that's likely a top 15 fantasy quarterback position. But because of the split snaps, I really don't think we can put stock in either one of those guys right now. Now, I want to get into the Texas game with Arch Manning because I'll tell you, when I watched Arch Manning in that first week against Ohio State, I was like, man, he just did not look good throwing the football. I have to say, I have the same concerns going forward after watching him this past weekend. I do think he's going to feast on these non-conference opponents. And remember, this is college fantasy football. It isn't college football. So as long as you're getting fantasy points from him, you are happy. But I have to tell you, if I'm a Texas fan, I'm just not seeing it in Arch Manning right now. And really with the way that the inconsistencies he's having in throwing the ball right now, there's really no connection with Ryan Wingo downfield right now. And, he was one of the top receivers on our board, a top 20 preseason receiver. I'm not really seeing it right now. There's no chemistry right there. Is this the week that Ryan Wingo gets going? We'll find out. He's got a good connection with Parker Livingstone right now, with Jack Andrews, the tight end. But I'm not really seeing what the hype is about with Arch Manning right now. I'm just really concerned for Texas as they get into the meat of their SEC schedule. If Arch Manning does not improve as a passer, I think Texas could be in trouble as we move halfway through the year. That's just my observation right now. But as long as you're getting the fantasy points, you're happy. Now let's go to Baylor, right? Wide receiver Josh Cameron with a big game this past weekend against SMU. Why am I spotlighting Josh Cameron? Well, it seemed like there was a lot of folks, they want to have meltdown on players. Yeah, you're going to hit some. Yeah, we're going to miss some. But Josh Cameron, he was shut down in that game against Auburn in that opener, right? We said kind of, you have to have patience a little bit. You just can't expect that everybody's just going to go off just from the word go, right? And so, there were some folks in the Discord, there were some guys in the Discord that were like ready to move off of Josh Cameron after week 1. you have to hold some of these guys. And Josh Cameron is just exhibit 1A on why you cannot get impatient with some of your draft picks after 1 week, right? Great second week, patience pays off. Now let's go to Minnesota. Darius Taylor, one of the top fantasy backs, if not the number one ranked fantasy back on everyone's board going into the season, pulls up lame in last week's game right before the goal line, doesn't even get the touchdown. Now we're going to be, is he playing this week? Is he not? I don't really see where Minnesota's going to play him. I would think they might hold him out for another week just as a precautionary measure. Grant Washington goes in 20 for 126. It's like, do we go get Grant Washington off the waiver wire? My thought is that Grant Washington may be a view into the future in that Minnesota backfield, but right now you have to look at the guy that got the next carry at the goal line. It's AJ Turner. So you think that, you would think AJ Turner is the next guy in line to get the spot if Darius Taylor does not go. Now, everybody's like, well, Grant Washington had 20 carries. I would think that once when Darius Taylor goes down, you've got a game that's really in hand. That you could have won that game with your third string. Are you really going to risk running AJ Turner out there to get an injury to your number two back against inferior competition? So I'm expecting AJ Turner to step into that role as far as being the lead back while Darius Taylor is out. But you know what? This is college football. Anything could happen. Could it be Grant Washington? Sure, it could be. I don't think it will be. I think it will be AJ Turner until Darius Taylor gets back. North Carolina State, I just want to highlight real quick, just Hollywood Smothers. I mean, it's really, CJ Bailey, Hollywood Smothers off to a really good start. If you have Hollywood Smothers as a running back for NC State, I see him getting a heavy workload this year. I mentioned it on our ACC schedule show. There's not a lot of tough defenses in the ACC. I think the ACC is going to be a really good conference for fantasy contribution this year. And I think if you have Hollywood Smothers, you have to feel really good right now. But as we stay in the ACC and we look at Syracuse, I remember on that show when I was talking schedules, I was talking about how Syracuse likely had the most difficult schedule, if not one of the most difficult schedules in the ACC. I was not considering UConn in that mix either, right? So they really struggled against UConn. We've got some bonus football. They hit the 2-point conversion. UConn hits that field goal. They go to overtime. But just some things that I noticed, right? A lot of people looking to move off of Daryl Gill. I get it. He's not exactly blowing up in this offense. I mean, Angeli really hasn't looked stellar anyway in that offense. And then you've got Yassine Willis, who went for 23 carries, 91 yards, and 3 touchdowns against Tennessee. And then they only give him 11 carries against UConn. So, I'm just really kind of confused by what Syracuse was doing against UConn. And there's one thing that did concern me, and I didn't watch the entire Syracuse game because I was flipping all over. But the one thing that I noticed, and it could have been just a coincidence, I mentioned this in my notes and observations, when I was tuning into that game, it just seemed like Angeli always had he was consistently just looking to the right when he was throwing the football. I never saw him look back across his body many times. So it was almost like if your receiver was lined up on the right side, you were most likely going to get the target. That's something to really look for with Angeli, and I'm wondering if he struggles. I really thought maybe we would see Ricky Collins in that matchup, and we didn't, which for me was really telling. Like, what does that say about what they feel about Ricky Collins right now? I thought maybe he would get a shot. But I do think as this season wears on, if Syracuse continues to struggle like that, I do think we're likely to see Collins in that offense. Staying in the ACC, Florida State, when I look at the running back position, of course, real easy opponent, but I feel like the tea leaves are starting to lean Gavin Sawchuk. Remember on last week's show, we talked about we're going to see what happens in that Florida State backfield. I feel like the pendulum has swung a little bit to favor Gavin Sawchuk, which is a really important position at RB1 in Gus Malzahn's offense. That's my takeaway right now after the second week as we go into week 3. Again, staying in the ACC, Damon Claiborne, questionable all week. He played against the FCS opponent. He went for 10 carries, 193 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And I'm wondering how many people actually left Damon Claiborne on the bench. Look, when we're talking Wake's offense, Damon Claiborne is the offense. There's no doubt about it. He is their best player. I'm just wondering how many people sat Damon Claiborne this week. And I would argue that this possibly, that performance, that 10 193 and 3 performance, may actually be the best performance he has all year. And I'm wondering how many fantasy owners may have missed out on that. Now, there's a lot of talk about, do I start my studs against inferior competition, knowing they're not going to get a lot of touches, they're not going to get a lot of looks? Ohio State wide receiver Jeremiah Smith is the reason why you have to play your studs, even in those cupcake matchups, because sometimes a player like that only needs 3 to 5 touches to give you what you actually need. So there's a lot of argument on both sides of the fence. I don't know if I could start this guy because he's not going to get a lot of work. The question is can he get it? Can he get those numbers before he comes out? Jeremiah Smith rewarding his fantasy owners that stuck it out with him in that cupcake matchup. Again, we're going to go back to the ACC. ACC heavy early on in the show, and Cade Klubnik. Cade Klubnik in that Clemson offense. It was scary there for a while. And of course, hey, look, you've got the LSU defense in the first week. Okay, we'll give some credit to the defense. You've got the wet weather. You've got the 2-hour weather delay. They came out of that, looked like a different offense. I don't think we have any excuses moving forward. Big game this week for Clemson against Georgia Tech. So a big week for Cade Klubnik. And I said in my notes and observations, if Cade Klubnik does not perform this week, we're likely to see a meltdown in the Discord. We'll see how that plays out. But while we're on the topic of Cade Klubnik, I also think it's important to note LaNorris Sellers, who was also one of the top fantasy quarterbacks coming into the season, he's not exactly taking the top off the world either, right? He's only got 3 total touchdowns in 2 games. He's only got 48 rush yards, 337 pass yards. So for as much as Cade Klubnik is getting slammed, I don't really see that much going to LaNorris Sellers. And I think both of them have a big game this week, with Sellers going up against Vanderbilt. Now let's go to Oregon. Right now, here's the one thing I take away from Oregon: Dante Moore, quarterback, legit. DeCorian Moore, wide receiver, legit. Noah Whittington looks like the running back one. But as long as Oregon is continuing to just run through these opponents right now, I'm not really sure how much stock we can put into their players because there's just so much rotation. I think another game or two, once when they come out of this Northwestern matchup, we'll see the lineup settle a little bit and guys get heavy reps as they get into the heart of that Big Ten schedule. Now let's go to Ole Miss, because in the preseason, we had De'Zhaun Stribling and Caden Lee as the top 2 receivers in that Ole Miss offense. After week 1, it looked like Harrison Wallace was Austin Simmons' favorite target. After week 2, I feel like we can absolutely say that seems to be the case. And so I think Caden Lee, you're looking at as probably the wide receiver 2 now. Remember, Caden Lee had a good year last year. De'Zhaun Stribling wasn't there. So I think you're looking at Caden Lee as the wide receiver 2, Wallace as the wide receiver 1. And, this is an example of Ole Miss loses Jackson Dart. He goes to the NFL. Austin Simmons comes in, same coach, same system, different quarterback, and all of a sudden, that different quarterback develops chemistry with another receiver that we didn't expect, and that was Harrison Wallace. There was some chatter in the preseason about Harrison Wallace being really legit in preseason camp. But Lee and Stribling got most of the attention, but it does seem like Harrison Wallace is Austin Simmons' top target in that Ole Miss offense. Now, as we go into the topic of non-power conference players transferring into the power conference schools, right? Mekhi Hughes, example 1. I mentioned on last week's show, Discord went into a meltdown. Everyone across the country, beat writers, media, everybody was wondering what the heck happened to Mekhi Hughes. Look, there's a lot of depth on that Oregon roster, and I've seen it throughout some of the college fantasy football circles. Hey, you know what? We got to be careful with G5 guys. We're never ranking them really high, when they go to power conference schools. And then I think you got to take it case by case. I mean, look at Ahmad Hardy last week at Missouri. I mean, Ahmad Hardy looks like he's going to be a legitimate contributor in that Missouri offense. And so we have to take it case by case. And I get the frustration, but Ahmad Hardy from Missouri off to a solid start. Again, another talk topic in the ACC. Haynes King not playing in their matchup this past week burned a ton of college fantasy football owners. And all I think about is I'm going to take this off the shelf because I talk about it every single year, and that is it's the one thing. It's the reason why we need to, if you don't have the auto sub feature in your league, you need to incorporate it because, and we talk about it every year, how injuries will bite you unexpectedly in college fantasy football because they talk about injury reports, but there's no guarantee. Teams are not going to get penalized or fined for not being accurate on the injury reports, right? The other thing is the last minute scratches. Like I did see that it was announced right before kick, but there was no hint that Haynes King was going to be out. So there was no attention on Haynes King before kickoff for a lot of the owners to actually get another sub in there in place because we had no clue that that was even happened. Haynes King doesn't play. If you don't have the auto sub feature in your league, you were absolutely burned. And I feel like this is a topic we have to take off the shelf, dust off every year. We talk about injuries and we talk about the last minute scratches. And that's why you have to try to incorporate the auto sub feature into your league. Let's go into the Sun Belt. We'll go non-power conference. Texas State, Bo Sparks off to a fantastic start in that Texas State offense with quarterback Brad Jackson. And let me tell you what Bo Sparks reminds me of a little bit. Not saying that he's as good, but he reminds me a little bit of Jordan Tyson. Go back to that Mississippi State game. Okay, now look, if Arizona State punches it in the end zone instead of kicking that field goal at the end, could have been a different result. But go back and take a look at some of the stats in that box score. And the reason why I say Bo Sparks reminds me of Jordan Tyson, Bo Sparks just gets the vast majority of targets. Whereas the same thing with Jordan Tyson, Arizona State does. It's like they don't even have another wide receiver, or they're not even using their tight end. It's like they're looking for Jordan Tyson, and everybody's just they're not even a secondary. They're a tertiary target because Jordan Tyson gets so many looks. They don't even try to spread it around. And I kind of feel like Bo Sparks gets that attention in the Texas State offense. Let's jump into the Big Ten because I think Wisconsin needs a conversation. We're talking Dylan Jones. And there was talk that Wisconsin was going to get back to that roots, get back to that offense where they're going to grind it out, steamroll opponents, impose their will. Quite frankly, the running game just doesn't look that good. Dylan Jones, 10 for 36 and a touchdown against Middle Tennessee. Wisconsin gets Alabama this week. I don't really expect things to get much better. I can see after this weekend, if not already, there might be some guys jumping off of that Wisconsin backfield already. West Virginia. Let's go there because Jaheim White taken off on a cart, season-ending injury. I feel for you guys that had Jaheim White in that Rich Rod offense. He seemed like he was destined for a big season in that offense, and now all of a sudden you lose what would have been a 1,200-yard, 12-plus touchdown running back for the season. Where does West Virginia go? And I think that's what we're looking at going forward. Is it going to be Clay Ash? Could it be Sincere Bowers? Could they possibly move a receiver like Rodney Gallagher into the backfield? The one thing that I know for sure, and I'm pretty positive, Rich Rod is going to find somebody. And it may be somebody that we do not even know yet. But keep your eyes on that West Virginia backfield because there's a diamond in the rough waiting to be had on the waiver wire. Arkansas, Taylon Green. Again, here's one of those things, right? Like I moved Jade Mayava up in my rankings because there's so much weight that you guys put in the first 4 to 5 weeks of the season. And I looked at USC's schedule and I was like, man, Lincoln Riley's offense is just going to feast in those first 4 games. And then USC gets Purdue this week. USC's offense should have another big game. And I almost feel like that people are saying, well, what about Taylon Green? Why didn't you do the same thing? And Taylon Green has been known to feast on non-conference opponents. And when I look at his stats, 11 touchdowns in the first 2 games. But Arkansas' schedule, it does get tougher as we move on. And I'm very much worried about, like, even I know USC's schedule is going to get tougher. There's a couple of strategies with USC. See what you can get out of them for the first 4 weeks and then leverage those numbers to try to create a trade in your favor moving forward, or you just hold on to them and ride it out and hope that Lincoln Riley can punch the right buttons against good competition in the Big Ten this year. But I almost feel with Taylon Green, I'm not quite sold on Arkansas. I think they're going to struggle as they get into the heart of that SEC schedule. That's a player where I'm looking at this week. I think they get Ole Miss. I'm almost thinking, man, I hope he has a good week this week. I think they may get Memphis the following week. And then I think after that, it's going to get very tough. I think you're going to see, for me, a lot of inconsistencies in Taylon Green moving forward, but he has been fantastic. I mean, he was one of the top ranked quarterbacks on my list last week, and he didn't disappoint. But I do think you do have to worry about him moving into the heart of that SEC schedule, not just him, but at Arkansas as a team. Miami, JoJo Trader. He was in my top 2025 preseason rankings, banged up. Going into the season, we were hearing reports that he was banged up, and then all of a sudden Malachi Toney and CJ Daniels are the top 2 targets in that Miami offense for quarterback Carson Beck. Now, whether or not Trader comes back and is healthy, at this particular point, it seems like a miss to me. I feel like Malachi Toney and CJ Daniels, even if Trader comes back, Trader's going to be no better than wide receiver 3 in that offense. And I think it's time that we move on and we just have to call it a whiff. The injury didn't do us any favors, but that I talk about injuries all year, particularly at the running back position. I talk about it in the preseason. It's the one thing that really can cause separation in the backfield when we feel like there's a battle between 2 running backs. And I feel like Trader's injury has basically given Malachi Toney and CJ Daniels the spotlight, and I don't see those guys coming off of the 1-2 positions in that Miami offense. Let's go to Army, because we have a new fantasy factor at the quarterback position in quarterback Kale Helams at Army. 41 carries, 124 yards, and 2 touchdowns with a passing TD this past weekend. And if he sticks, boy, remember Bryson's daily season last year. There's potential in that offense for Helams to be a major fantasy player in 2025 if he can maintain consistency. And as on the topic of consistency through 2 weeks, how about Michigan running back Justice Haynes? I have to tell you, I'll be the first one to tell you, I jumped on a lot of Jordan Marshall shares in college fantasy football drafts that I've done this year because I was able to get him much later than where I was able to get Haynes, thinking that it was going to be more of that 50-50 split. Here's what I feel. Man, this is the one guy that they cannot afford to lose right now. He is their best player. 35 carries on the season, 284 rushing yards with 4 touchdowns. To me, Justice Haynes is the offense. They can't afford to get him hurt against Central Michigan. They're gonna need him for Big Ten play. But I have him as one of the top running backs going into this week because I don't know who else Michigan has right now. That is their offense. So I can see Haynes going in contributing a couple of touchdowns this week, getting out of the game with 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, take him out at halftime, middle of the third quarter. Let Marshall get some run and get Haynes healthy, keep him healthy for Big Ten play. But right now, he looks like a fantastic fantasy asset moving forward. Let's go to Washington. Jonah Coleman has been on absolute fire. 288 rush yards, 7 touchdowns to start the season. Why is this important? Well, those 7 touchdowns are eating into the fantasy value of quarterback Damon Williams. So Damon Williams high on a lot of draft boards going into the season. Jonah Coleman right now really eating into vulturing those numbers away from Damon Williams right now. Let's see how those numbers, see if they level out as Washington gets into Big Ten play, plays some tougher defenses, and I think better days are ahead if you have quarterback Damon Williams. And then we'll end it at Alabama. And the reason why I want to talk about Alabama, because you've got Ryan Williams, who was a preseason top 5 receiver. And of course, he had that injury. And I think he's going to be okay this week. But the one thing, and this was something that Mike and I talked about in the preseason, and I told Mike, I was like, a guy that I really like is Jeremy Bernard for Alabama. And the reason why I like Jeremy Bernard is I think this is the offense that DeBoer wants to run. No more Jalen Milroe. Remember, Jalen Milroe, 20 touchdowns, rushing touchdowns last year. Ty Simpson is not that quarterback. So that run-heavy system was now going to transition to a pass-heavy system this year. And I know that there was some attention to Isaiah Horton coming in from Miami, but I always felt like Jeremy Bernard was a little bit under the radar. I have to tell you, through watching Alabama, Jeremy Bernard feels like a very similar situation as Harrison Wallace and Austin Simmons at Ole Miss. Jeremy Bernard, to me, feels like Ty Simpson's favorite target right now, and we'll see how that plays out moving forward. But if you have Jeremy Bernard, I think you have to feel really good right now moving forward. So that's going to do it for the Week 3 show. As we come out of Week 2, going into Week 3, those are some of the things that really jumped out at me. Let's see how those carry into Week 3 and what else we learned this weekend. Fantastic games last weekend. Sometimes the most underrated slates tend to be some of the better ones. The late slate of Saturday was just fantastic. Great finish after great finish after great finish. I've got high hopes for Week 3. This is it. That's the Week 2 show. That's a wrap. Good luck to everybody in Week 3. Good luck again. I'll see you next week.